Hi, I'm Alec from EasierHabits.com. I coach working parents in how to develop lives and careers of joy, growth, and balance. And this video is for people who are not good at staying organized, how to actually learn the skill of scheduling your time for optimal productivity without burning out. If you are super dialed in and you love your calendar and use it all the time and you're in sync with it, well, great, that's fantastic. That's not for you. I am definitely a person who found this difficult in my own life, and it's been a skill I've had to consciously develop in different phases. And the thing that doesn't work for me is diving right into a heavily structured organization like the 12-month year. It's not a bad program. If you're good at following programs, try that out. But for me, just diving into that was not super helpful, and it was really a skill I had developed in small little steps. So in this video, I'll talk about those steps and a few tips for how to organize your daily and weekly schedule for optimal productivity without burnout. Also, I have in pretty much any video, except for I think last week's commentary video, I have a show notes section for a tangent. And so if you want to check out the links below in the YouTube video, I will go ahead and write out a little bit about how I switch up my schedule for days when I'm not feeling great or not feeling in optimal health, because in fact, this week, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather with sinus infection, a little bit tired. And plus, there's other factors that have come up where I have my weekly plan and they've kind of thrown me off. And so I'll talk with how to adjust your schedule, because I think that's the flip side. This video, though, will just be about practicing setup initially, and you can always go to the blog notes to find a little bit more about how to adjust to obstacles in your schedule. A lot of my early attempts to schedule have been pretty rocky. So early on, when you're in like a high school student, basically everything is scheduled out for you and you just have a little bit of free time at home in which you're supposed to do homework, and half the time you don't, or more, who knows. And so you don't really need to schedule. The first time I really had to schedule was when I was a missionary, where I was planning when I would go out and make appointments with people. And because you're making appointments with people, you have to schedule. And this is with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. And so they had like a standard planner that you would use. And so I used that. I made sure that I knew when my appointments would be, and I made sure I hit them, but I didn't put a lot of thought or effort into that. When I got back from my mission and got to college, I felt like I should schedule more. Again, a little bit like high school, most of your schedule is kind of set out by your class schedule. And so I think our university had some weekly class schedule app. So that kind of does a lot of your schedule for you, where you're going to be at least during that. And you still have a lot of free time, but I didn't really schedule that. I felt a little bit guilty having used a schedule before, thinking like, oh, I should be more organized, it'd be more effective, I'd procrastinate less if I had a schedule. And so I designed my own planner a couple of times. I didn't stick with my planner for like more than a month. It would feel obsolete, it wouldn't feel helpful. I'd feel like my life would change too much, and so it just didn't make sense the way I'd organized it before. And so I just found creating a schedule more burden than benefit. And for me, that's one of the real problems with developing a habit. If you want to develop a real habit, not just something you do regularly, but a habit, it has to be rewarding. And if you are not an organized person and you dive into some kind of complex, like weekly or monthly scheduling system, chances are it will feel like it's a heavy burden, especially because you're not used to it. The burden will outweigh the benefit and you will never form a habit. You might force yourself to do it for a while, but you'll burn out. I mean, basically that's my philosophy behind the whole name Easier Habits, right? You need to make your habits easier so that the reward outweighs the benefit and they become actual habits. They become habituated. You do them on autopilot and you don't need discipline as much. And then you can scale them up a little bit at a time. So basically what I'm going to walk through is that Easier Habits process with my schedule. And really where my skill scheduling began was when I needed to develop a habit of yoga. I realized when I was in Japan that yoga helped me be more alert and wake up for a few hours. We were in a remote mountain village where it was blizzarding, so yoga helped me stay warm. It boosted my circulation. It made me less allergic, and I was terribly allergic. I probably have a video or a blog about that somewhere, link below, where I talk about the process of finding the habit that helps me through my allergies that were so severe that I could barely breathe, right? And what else? Oh yeah, I didn't have back issues when I was doing yoga. So I'd identified yoga as a habit I wanted to do. I still had a hard time doing it. So I had to do two things. One of which was to scale my yoga down and just at first do a minute of it. Like I basically did one sun salutation. Oh, I think I tried to do one sun salutation, and even that I was too lazy to do. I hadn't built up the skill of being able to develop habits, which is now much easier with a lot of practice. That's a little self-judgment, and self-judgment is not helpful. And so even I have to remind myself of that sometimes. But I hadn't built up the ability to work habits into my routine. And so I think I started yoga with just 20 seconds a day. And even that was very difficult for me to do consistently, because consistency is a skill, and that is true in both developing yoga habits as well as scheduling. And so my first schedule was literally just a checkbox in an app: have you done yoga today? And that was my accountability, basically. I used my initial schedule just as pure accountability. And I started with one single task: have you done this today? I would look at that checkbox before I went to bed. And if it was not checked, I would go out of my bedroom, do 20 seconds of downward dog, check the box, and then go back to bed. So that was really the first calendar that I did. And of course that can scale up as I started adding other tasks that I wanted to complete during the day. So this was phase one: just create a checklist of things you want to make sure that you get done. And if you really want to build in the consistency, make this something you check before bed, or if you cut out screen time before bed, whenever you unplug from screen time, check it. And pair it with a habit that is very easy, right? Something that you can do right then, or in a minute or 5 minutes, and then check it and then go to bed, right? So that is how I did my first schedule. And then from there, it can scale to a checklist of multiple items. What's good about phase one is it's super easy. It is the easiest you will ever have it setting up a schedule, because it's just a list of a few tasks, not even necessarily all your tasks, just the ones you want to be most accountable for. And then at the end of the day, you check them off. All right, this is why it is an easy, simple habit, and you will find that developing the skill of personal accountability, at least for me, outweighed the difficulty of writing out a simple list of my top priority items to do for the day, which started out with just one single item. So if you're struggling with calendars, that is a place I would recommend. So phase two of learning to schedule for me was adding in the dimension of time to each of these activities, time boxing each one. So instead of just a checklist, I have a list of activities, and I'm actually saying this activity will be from 9 to 10 this morning, and this activity will be from 10 to 11 or 10 to 12. And this is something I did just on like Post-its by hand each morning. I'd look at this point, I was working for a company. I had come back from the remote mountains of Japan after discovering that being a stay-at-home dad and trying to start your own company while living in the middle of blizzarding nowhere in Japan was a little challenging. So I came back to code for a while. And I would usually look at my meeting schedule in Google Calendar, and then I would write out what I would do during the day, during the work day. And then I would time box it. So this is what I'd be doing from 9 to 10 or 10 to 12, and I'd write that out. This was actually really effective for work in an office. So if someone asked me to do something that day, drop what I was doing, they could literally see me cross out some activities, write in what they were doing. And that was a visual reminder that when they asked me to do something, I was shifting my focus from something else. And I didn't do it like in a passive aggressive way. I was very friendly. And I only did it if what they asked me to was higher priority than what I was working on. But when I did that, it actually showed people that I was willing to pay a cost to support their priorities and something I identified as a mutual priority. So that was kind of a fun way to do it. I love sticky notes too. Of course, if I would come home and want to work on my own startup or novel writing or other things, I might have a sticky note for that time. Or actually, I think for a while I did a two-tier system where I would, in an app, I would schedule my time at home and then not worry about my time at work. When I got to work, I would do my time at work on a sticky note. I had two different systems that kept them separate in my brain. But what was common between both of these systems is just a list of activities, time boxed to a particular hour. And the reason why this is a good step two is that it grows a little bit on step one, right? So step one, you have a list of activities that you're being accountable for, and you're keeping it simple. There's no time dimension, right? In step two, you add the time dimension. And so now you're trying to, one, estimate how long these tasks will take, and then two, holding yourself accountable for finishing them in that time. The second one is why it's not a good step one for a lot of people who aren't good with schedules, right? Because if you're not good at estimating and holding yourself accountable to try and complete something in a particular amount of time, then really what's going to happen, at least in my experience, is that you get very disappointed with yourself, discouraged, and then you just drop the scheduling altogether. So it's actually demotivating, right? So you want the practice of being able to gauge how much stuff you can do approximately in a day with a checklist first before you add the layer of time boxing each activity. That said, if you find yourself continually running over the allotted amount of time, you probably need to schedule more buffer time in your day, or just give yourself more time for each activity. And another thing you can do that I did for a while actually was at night I would journal, or just in bullet points, make a note of the activities that took a lot less or a lot more time than I expected, so that that really reinforced my ability to understand how long different activities took, and so that my estimating could get a little bit better. So that is phase two. That is a simple time box of all your activities. You can do that, in the morning. I would usually do this for like 15 or 20 minutes for my work one before I dived into work. And then for my personal one, I usually did that, I guess, in like 10 or 15 minutes before work. So I did invest probably like half an hour in planning, but I did also find myself more productive doing that planning. And there were, peripheral benefits, like I mentioned, that when you know exactly what your schedule is, you can either tell people that ask you to do stuff, hey, this didn't fit in my schedule today, or they can see you actually changing up your schedule, which reinforces the effort you're putting in to adapt to their requests. So there definitely are some benefits to that, and I found that was generally greater than the half an hour I had gained back. But again, I don't think I could have started there. I think I would have found it discouraging. I would have been discouraged by my inability to guess the right amount of time for things or stick to that amount of time. So basically, this is one of the things that went wrong every other time I tried to actually schedule out my day or week on a regular basis. So if you're having a hard time with schedule, start with a checklist and then move to phase two, time boxing. And then there's phase three, which is then setting activities and priorities for the whole week and time boxing a whole week. Now, when I did this first, I did half steps. I kind of slowly backed into it. I kind of did a combination of phase one on a week scale and then phase two for daily. And what that looks like was just, for the week, I would come up with my week's priorities, and then I would actually attach those week priorities to a day, but I wouldn't time box, I wouldn't actually schedule out each day in advance. And so the advantages of that was that got me thinking on a little bigger scale in terms of what I wanted to accomplish. And so it was helpful. I didn't have to think each day, all right, what do I need to do today? I knew what I needed to do. I just had to figure out how to schedule it. And then I would go ahead and time box it, schedule out each day individually. And then eventually that evolved into the point where I would go ahead and think of what I needed to do that week and go ahead and schedule out the full week in advance. And so the benefit when I moved fully into phase 3, i.e. not just coming up with weekly priorities, but coming up with coming up with the entire week schedule, the advantage of that was that I no longer had to spend half an hour planning each day. I could usually do a week planning in half an hour or 40 minutes and get hours back in my week. Now, of course, the trade-off of this is there are more unknowns, so your weekly schedule is more likely to be thrown. You might have to spend some time adjusting that if your priorities are greatly thrown off. But usually, again, for me, this is less time than I would have spent planning each day individually from scratch. So I think for a lot of people, they hit this weekly cadence and that's pretty good for them. They figure out what their weekly goals are and they schedule that out. And I have to admit, I was a long time in phase 2, actually, because I felt that was fairly comfortable. I kind of had some idea of longer term goals, but being able just to prioritize a week and get what you wanted for that week done, or most of the things that you wanted for that week done, is pretty effective, right? A lot of people are pretty satisfied with that, but there is one more level. So phase 4 of learning to schedule is starting to work with longer timelines. There is no magic timeline length, but a great example is from the book, The 12-Week Year, and that says 3 months. So basically their argument is a year is too long, people will tend to lose focus, procrastinate, and then scramble at the end of the year. Plus there are too many unknowns that could derail your plan. Whereas 3 months being much shorter is still enough for a reasonable change, a significant change, but at the same time, there are fewer unknowns and there's enough urgency that you can kind of keep a certain level of focus throughout the whole period rather than setting some goals in January and forgetting about them. So, and there are ways to back into step 4 to build up to a full step 4. What a full step 4 might look like is, setting your 3-month goal and then prioritizing what you will do each week to meet that goal, and maybe setting up a basic schedule, not like or a schedule template or something like that. Setting up accountability systems so that you have the weekly goals lead up to the 3-month goal, maybe even some contingencies like, all right, what do I do if I'm not hitting my numbers on this goal? How can I adjust? Or building in some buffer rooms. That's one thing I did when I tried this out. I don't always operate on that, and as an entrepreneur with a young business, I find there is enough going up that I'm up and down in my life, just opportunities that come in that I couldn't have foreseen, or I month to month learn quite a bit and try out a lot of new things, and so it doesn't always make sense to try and think that I know now enough to know how to most effectively meet a goal 3 months from now. But one way to back into a full step 4 would be just to simply think about what is the goal you want in 3 months, right? And then just write that down and refer to that every week as you do your weekly planning, right? That's still starting to work with a longer timeline, but it's not the full planning out the goals for each week and an accountability system, right? And so a lot of businesses kind of do this, but to be honest, basically what happens is your boss either tells you a lot of the goals, or the systems you're setting with your boss are you're setting goals that sound good, but not actually things that are meaningful to you, because you're kind of self-censoring. And so this falls apart. But if you are working on something that's actually meaningful to you, i.e. a goal that is where you want to be in a few months, and you've worked through the other steps of scheduling, this should be within reach. Again, you can kind of back into it by just having a overall 3-month goal and integrating that into your planning week to week, and then slowly work up to having a 3-month goal with that 12-week plan and specific numerical goals that go with the action steps for each week, etc. Those are all things you just layer into this. Now, of course, this isn't the only timeline to manage. You might think, where do I want to be in a few years, right? And this won't be scheduling though. This moves into kind of more like vision. Where do I want to be in 10 years? Where do I want to be in 3 years? And that is a good thing to do whenever you set up whenever you go into a new 3-month period, right? And so there are other timelines to manage. I have used this, in fact, with my wife. We had a contingency program, and we were living in California, renting apartments. I was starting to build my own business, do market research, and experiment with services, but I was still working and programming at this point, and we still had an option out. Like, I knew I wanted to coach people, but I thought I might be able to do that as an engineering manager. And then at one point, I just realized, especially when COVID hit, that most engineering managers really don't do the level and kind of coaching that I would like to do. So even if I did a little bit of coaching, I really wouldn't find it nearly as exciting as the kind of coaching I do right now. And the other thing I realized with COVID was California is a super expensive place to be if you're locked down and can't do anything. So like a lot of other people, I just moved on with my plan of getting a house somewhere where I could afford it, and I moved to Austin, right? And that had been our 3-year plan, roughly, that we articulated within the first year of getting back from Japan. And then we recognized at about year 2 when COVID hit, like, all right, we already have this 3-year plan. Let's just move up the schedule and do it after 2 years. So, that type of planning is helpful. What I find is that you don't have to do that all the time. And once you get up to this level, there's a pattern I see, right? When you do your 3-month planning, you might spend a little bit of time up front considering the longer time frame, whether that be 3 years, 10 years, whatever. Like, where do you really want to be in life? And what 3-month goal is going to be the next step towards that? When you do your weekly planning, you should think about, where's your 3-month goal? Are you on track to hit that? What would be most helpful? What are the big opportunities this week that will push you towards your 3-month goal? And then, when you check in daily, you might take a look at not only what your schedule is today, but just check at what your weekly goals are and keep in sync with that. And so I find this is a great way to schedule that kind of waterfalls down, right? You're always aware of the next step, a little bit broader picture, but at the same time, you don't have to think every day, for instance, all right, what am I going to do today that's going to meet my 3-month goal, right? It keeps it a little bit manageable. You're only ever really managing 2 time frames at a time when you hit this point where you are now have a scheduling system that includes daily, weekly, 3-month, and potentially beyond, right? So that is what scheduling looks like for me. That is the easier habits way of building that up, right? Starting with the simplest habits so that the effort and doesn't outweigh the benefit, and you kind of build that in and then layer in additional complexities and skills on top of that slowly, one piece at a time, until you're working with a more complex system. And I'm finding that this is really helpful. I am someone who tends to otherwise just burn out. I'll work a lot, burn out, be not as productive. But the weeks in which I'm really good at scheduling and make myself have some buffer time and some relaxation or chillaxing time, I actually usually get more done. Like, consistency is more powerful than sprints of energy. It's just a little bit difficult if you're someone who has a hard time with calendars to jump into that. And probably if you are one of those people, the problem you had was seeing someone who's got a fully fleshed out advanced system and trying to jump into that. It's just really hard if you're not naturally a scheduler to jump into a full-fledged, for instance, 12-week year program or whatever program, you name it, right? So start small, build it up, and let me know how this goes for you, or let me know if there's different phases, if you have hit different phases, or if you have different versions of daily, weekly, or 3-month or longer time frame planning. I'd love to hear that down in the comments below. You can check out the blog for how I adapt to being thrown off my weekly game by unexpected problems or being sick or whatnot. So thank you very much for being here, and of course, as always, make big changes one small habit at a time.